Yeah, we're talking about brand ambassadorships with Ellie Kay. Ellie Kay is the founder of Heroes at Home, a nonprofit dedicated to financial education for military families. She is also the founder of Ellie Kay & Company, a 20-year-old limited liability company. She is the best-selling author of 15 books, a media veteran of over 2,800 interviews, and a Toastmaster accredited speaker. Married to Bob, a retired Air Force fighter pilot, the Kays have 7 children, including 3 sons who serve in the Marines, the Air Force, and the Army. She happens to be my boss. Please welcome Ms. Ellie Kay.
Thank you. Thanks, Bethany. Hey, do you appreciate Bethany's energy? Let's give it up for her. All right, great. Well, just a little bit about my background. I love speaking to military audiences. A lot of the work that I do is mainly out in the civilian sector, but we are a military family. My dad retired as a chief, master sergeant from the Air Force. He started out in the Navy, where he met my mom in Rota. She is from Jerez de la Frontera in Sud España, so I am Hispanic, and I'm proud of that. And my mother gave me some advice that I think really applies to this session. And she used to say, "Oh, listen, Ellie, life is so difficult that you cannot please everybody. So you just need to please me." So what we're going to talk about now is something that is going to be unique to you. And here's what's the cool thing about what I'm about to talk about. You may be at a point in your career where this may not apply right now, but you might start to get some weird inquiries that are coming in, and you don't know quite how to field them. But having sat in on this session, you may realize that there is another stream of income that is largely untapped, that has not been talked about at this military bloggers conference, except for right now. So it may not work for you right now, it may work in a couple years. Let me give you an example. I gave this presentation at FinCon in 2014. There were only about 40 people in the room at the time. 6 people in that room ended up coming into the brand ambassador space in a more proactive way. And one of the gals I work with, and this year she's making 6 figures just on this one additional stream of income. So knowing how to do it makes all the difference in the world. And it's a really great way to be able to have an additional stream of income. So we're going to look at the secrets to monetize brand ambassadorships. We will be drinking from a fire hose. I'm going to go very quickly. I hope to leave time at the very end to have some Q&A. And at some point, I have to give away a Fire TV stick. So I am a mother of 7, and so I get a little distracted sometimes and forget things. So you guys have to remind me to give this away, because we want to be sure to be able to do that. Let me just give you a little bit of background on my story. So I married my husband, and I got a 3-for-1 deal. I married what I call the world's greatest fighter pilot, and I inherited 2 stepdaughters. And then we had 5 children in 7 years. And at the very same time, we moved 11 times in 13 years. And for those military spouses here in the audience, you know that being a broker is not a sustainable career for a military spouse, especially when I'm pregnant the first 7 years of our marriage. And so the other thing that we had was $40,000 in consumer debt. I didn't ask him for a credit report before we got married. Now, and I'm not even kidding, all of our kids, we make them get a credit report from their significant other once they start to get serious. So I didn't know that from that divorce he had $40,000 in consumer debt. And so he left aerospace, he was in the Guard, to go back into the actives, which is what he really wanted to do so he could fly full time. Took a $50,000 a year pay cut, and in the process, we're paying 1/3 of our income to child support, 1/3 for state and federal taxes, because we're state residents of California. And we were living on the other 1/3, servicing $40,000 in consumer debt with one income, because I couldn't really work as a military spouse. So I took my business background and I put it towards family finance. Within 2.5 years, we were completely debt-free, and we've remained debt-free ever since. And I started doing things like speaking and becoming an expert in the area of finance and writing 15 books, going on media, and what we're going to talk about today, which is brand ambassadorship. Now, the first few times that I had been working in the military space, I started getting these little pings. And they would come in, it was Quaker Oats, and it was Dial soap, and it was Bounty paper towels. And they would be making these inquiries, and I had no clue, what is that? What is that all about? And because it's such a niche, no one on the speakers bureau that represented me knew what it was about. No one in my author circles knew what it was about until one lady finally connected me with a spokesperson network, and this was basically an agent. She got me my first deal. My first deal was a very, very low-income deal. It was about 15 years ago, and it was $5,000 for a satellite media tour. I'm going to explain what that is here in a little bit, but that's how I was off and running. For about a dozen years, I've made a six-figure income just on this. So it really can be done, and it's a lot of work, but if you're savvy and you're smart in the way that you manage things, you can do it as well. So let's start to look at the secrets. One of the very first secrets is to understand diversification. And when it comes to being diversified, it's important to do a lot of things. If you want to be a working brand ambassador, if you really want to maximize your earning potential, it's important to diversify. So for those of you that are bloggers and just content to be a blogger, you can make some money doing that. You can make more money if you go beyond that and you learn how to do radio and television and podcasting. Not that you have to have your own podcast, but you have to be able to go on those shows and interview well. And if you would develop your speaking area as well. So that's the very first area, is understanding that diversification and how important it is going to be to your brand. So one of the other ways that's really important is to become an expert in your field. Now, you could have initials before or after your name that can make you that expert, or you can just work in this space a lot and you're kind of a self-trained expert. You go to courses like this, you learn SEO, whatever it is where you're an expert in your field, you can earn that and you can develop that so that you're an expert in the niche area. The next thing that we want to look at is looking at that expert status. So as I said, you can write a book and you can have years of working in the field. You can become a media contributor. One of the things that I suggest, especially to be more marketable, and I love that Kayla, where is she? There you are. So she, works a lot in the media space in terms of television, and that's how I got started. We were stationed at Fort Drum. I went to the local news station. I made a pitch to be on the show, and I was promoting a particular we were doing a food drive, and I was giving a coupon seminar. And so I went on the show, and I thought it out ahead of time. I had $120 worth of groceries that we put on the set. I only paid $5 for it, and then we talked about that. They were so intrigued with it that I looked at them and I said, after we were off air, we ought to do this more often. And they said, how often do you want to do it? Monthly, weekly? So I got my own television spot. And it was funny because I was a professional speaker at that point, and I knew very little about being on television. I mean, I had been on The Price is Right and won the showcase, but that's about the extent of the media that I had. Yeah, the Showcase Showdown, I'll tell you that story later. But at any rate, I had very limited experience. And so the very next week I went on, and I didn't know what a soundbite was. So if you're wanting to be more marketable, you need to learn about media. And you need to go on media. You need to learn the elements of media. So I had a 3-minute spot, and I spent 2 minutes telling a story, and I hadn't even gotten to the tip. And so they started to freak out a little bit, and so they got me to go to the tip, and I just really buffooned it in a major way. And I was so embarrassed, and it was a big fail. But I thought, you know what? I have this opportunity. I am going to do the work to learn how to do better. The next week, I practiced sound bites. I learned what 15 seconds was like, and I nailed it. And from that point on, for a whole year, even as a military spouse, I started to develop that skill set. So that's just my story on doing that. You guys will have a different story as to how you develop that. An educational degree, being a blogger or a podcaster. Now, here's an interesting thing. If you have a huge following, if you have 500,000 followers, if you have a huge social media presence, you still may not be as marketable as someone who has all of these skill sets. Because you could have that following, but if you're hard to work with and you're high maintenance, then they may not want to work with you again, or they may not give you a longer campaign. You could maybe be a podcaster, but if you can't do professional speaking and stand on a platform and make a presentation, then you're going to make less money and you're going to be less marketable. So all of these things are really important to be able to do and to be able to accomplish. And let me just say one other thing. I have this thing that my literary agent told me about. He called it goodwill coin. And goodwill coin is not money itself. It's just the whole idea of when you are given an opportunity, you're granted a certain amount of goodwill. They hired you because they think you can do the work, and so you have just a set amount of that. Some high maintenance people, brand ambassadors, they use up all that goodwill before they're even done with the project, and word gets out among PR firms that hire brand ambassadors. They've got a huge following, but they're really high maintenance, they're condescending to our people. It just, being nice pays off. It really does. And so I try to actually earn goodwill coin when I do my jobs. I try to exceed their expectations to be able to do that. So let's continue. And the second secret is to understand responsibilities. So I mentioned very briefly an RMT, or an SMT. Does anyone familiar with that already? Okay, so Mike Kelly is, and Doug Nords, okay, and Josh, Ellich, Kayla. Have you done them? Have you done them? You've done them, Mike, right? Okay, so a satellite media tour is a really unique kind of an animal, and they are in my opinion, they're the most lucrative. So I told you that first SMT that I did 15 years ago was $5,000. The last one that I've done fairly recently was $25,000. And that's for basically about a day and a half worth of work. A half a day prep time and then the day of the SMT. And so a satellite media tour is when you show up, usually in New York. You can do it from all parts of the country, but most of the PR firms are either in New York or on the West Coast. And you show up at about 4 o'clock in the morning to go into makeup. Now I'm a West Coaster. So 4 o'clock in the morning is the middle of the night for me. It's 1 a.m. So you wake up and you go into makeup for about 45 minutes, and then you start to rehearse, and then you have your first hit of the day at around 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning. And what you do is you're going on to news shows. So you're waking up America. You're doing local network news on these satellite media tours. They get a script. Most of the times the talent that's interviewing you will stick to the script, so you rehearse the script and the answers to the questions that they're asking you. Sometimes they go off script, and a brand ambassador has to be able to go with the flow if you go off script. Sometimes they've had like vinegar in their Wheaties that morning and they're real cranky and they try to slip you up. That doesn't happen all that often, but you have to be able to handle that. And what you're doing when you go on these satellite media tours, when you've been hired by a brand, is to deliver brand messaging. And in a little while here, I'm going to actually show you a real clip. And I have taken off the first part of that where they've announced ahead of time to do their due diligence with the FTC. They've announced this particular segment is sponsored by. So I took that off because when we watch this clip, I want you guys to figure out who the sponsor is, who I was working for on that particular clip, because these satellite media tours and radio media tours, it's really cool. You can do them from your pajamas, from your landline. And so those are kind of like my favorite. And what's unique about these is that they're usually about 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes at the most. And you have to look directly into a camera, and so there's no other live person there, and you have to be as high energy with your first hit of the day and deliver all your messaging as you are with the very last hit of the day, which can be about 4 or 5 hours later, and you could be doing 35 hits. So you're doing back to back to back to back to back, and that's why it's a unique skill set. And it's one of those things you just have to learn by doing, but you have to have a lot of radios or television interviews under your belt already. So before you even attempt an SMT, they will do a little bit of training with you, but you have to know what your time limit is. Sometimes they'll cut your segment from 4 minutes to 2 minutes, and they tell you in your ear, oh, by the way, this is going to be a 2-minute interview, which means usually there's one messaging point. So if you'll just go to walmart.com, you can see this new educational program. So that's a messaging point when I worked for Walmart. And you have to deliver at least your primary messaging in each and every one of those interviews, or you have failed the entire satellite media tour. I've done 50 plus SMTs, and I've hit 100% messaging in all of them. But that's a skill set that has a monetized value associated with it. So we're going to move on because we could spend a lot of time on that, but I will say this one other thing. There have been SMTs where you're at the mercy of tech. You know, there's always tech issues, and you have to be able to flow with it. And there was one time when we had a large market. So we had Phoenix, which is a fairly large market. I mean, it's not like Duluth, Minnesota, which is a small market. And you don't want that client to miss out on that big market. But the audio was spotty for them, and it was on their end. I had done about 10 hits for that day, so I heard that they were do that, and they said, and 4, 3, and 5, so I could hear that they were following the script. So what I did was, rather than saying, I can't hear you, there's something wrong with the audio, and losing the hit entirely, I started saying it in my mind because I knew the script, and I knew that when I started to answer, even if I was talking over them, they could blame it on the delay that's a part when you're on satellite, or they'd stop talking because they would hear me talking. We did the hit, they never even knew that there was spotty audio, and it worked. Another example of things that can come up is we had one station that went long. And so the producers were saying in my ear, they were saying, Dallas is coming in next. Ellie, you need to wrap it up. We got Dallas. And so I'm trying to wrap it up, and they're not letting me. And so finally I said, I really, need to go. It's been great talking to you. And so by that time, Dallas comes in on the satellite while the other market, I think it was Seattle, was signing off. And at the very same time, I heard them saying, Ellie, we were really glad to have you on today's show today. Thanks for coming. And then Dallas said, welcome to the show, Ellie. It's great to have you here. So I looked at the camera and I said, really great to be with you. And we nailed it. So there's these things that, there's a skill set that kind of comes up, and it keeps life interesting, but you get paid to be able to do that. Social media tours, that's probably what you're most used to, but these can be monetized. And we're going to talk about what monetization looks like on a PR campaign for a major, like a Fortune 500 company. So let's talk about who you're working for. For the most part, the only people that can afford the kind of brand ambassador, spokesperson, they have different names, that I'm talking about are Fortune 500 companies that hire third-party PR firms to build out a campaign for them. Now, I've worked with companies like eHealth Insurance, and they did it all in-house. They had SMTs, they had everything, and they weren't a Fortune 500 company, but they could do it. So that was the exception rather than the rule. Otherwise, people just can't afford it because, for example, like an SMT, they have to rent satellite time, they have to rent studio time, they have to pay people, they have to pay you. But it's still cheaper to do a satellite media tour than it is to create a $3 million commercial and then get airtime to run that. So it is cost effective, and that's why these companies hire brand ambassadors to be able to do that. Social media tours, there's all kinds of social media tours. What are some of the ones you think of right now when you think of a social media tour of some kind? Let's yell it out. What? Facebook? Yeah, like a Facebook Live. What else? Yeah, so Twitter parties, Twitter chats. What? Yeah, Instagram. Okay, so those are all the kinds of things that you can do, different events, things like that, not to mention just the flat-out social mentions that are out there. But each of those social mentions can be monetized for a specific campaign. We're going to talk about money and what that looks like in just a little bit, but these are all things that are part of what that is about and what those look like. Some of the other things are events. So I just had a client that she came to me because she's on this Facebook page, and she had nationwide insurance. Sorry about that, Mike Kelly. It was nationwide insurance. And they came to her, and they had a huge campaign planned out. They had live speaking events, so that's why she needed to be a speaker. And they were in these different cities, and they were doing these entire campaigns with a social component, with the live speaking event, and with blog leading up to it, with social mentions tied into the blog. So it was a big campaign. And so she needed to be able to do that. So I came in because she didn't know how to navigate that at all. Because she was not working a lot in the speaking space, she says, I don't know how much I should charge for a speaking gig. Maybe $500 because, I spoke at one event and I got a free conference, and that was about the... Well, if she had gone back to them and said, well, I charge $500 for my speaking events, they wouldn't have hired her. Because she's not on the level and she's not the caliber that they wanted. She needed to charge a minimum of $5,000, a minimum. And I have another client that's $13,500 per speaking event for the gig, not to mention all the other things that are tied into that. Those are separate, those are a la carte, although they can kind of all be bundled in together. And so you can see how that's another element, are the events that you do. And those are some things that it's good to be prepared to do. So the other thing that we need to look at, because people will oftentimes say, well, Ellie, how do I get to be a better speaker? Or how do I get paid speaking events? And we're talking about brand ambassadorships, but tied into that is the whole idea of being a speaker who's working in the space. Because then if you're a speaker working in the space, that can lend itself when they want someone who can do an event. And my first advice is become excellent at what you do. Good enough ain't good enough if you want to be working in the space. And I would suggest for all of you who are speakers and want to become better speakers or excellent speakers, or maybe bloggers that haven't even ventured out into the speaking realm, might even be a little frightening to you at times, to join an organization like Toastmasters. It's cheap, you go weekly, the people in that group usually love you, they become your friends, and you can try out new material and you can develop your speaking skills. And one of the greatest things they'll do for you at Toastmasters, and I almost hate to say this for the rest of the speakers for today and tomorrow, and that is one of the things they will do there is they will count your uhs and ums, your likes and so's, all of the filler things that you do. And while you're just talking to a group of people, I mean, it's not like we need to major on those kinds of things, but this is kind of a different level. This is brand ambassadorship, and excellence is the mark. That's what we're actually looking for in what we're doing with this. When it comes to messaging, all right, you guys are, a lot of you are bloggers, right? How many are you bloggers? Okay, so any of you had to list for the FTC that you have got a sponsored post, right? Okay, so you guys are familiar with that. That same thing applies when it comes to brand ambassadorship. And that is, I don't know what happened to that. That kind of got wonky in the translation, but I'll read what's there at the bottom. But when you're looking at the messaging, it's not about your blog or your book or your YouTube show or anything else. When you're being hired by a major company to work for them, you're not thinking, oh, this is a great time to promote my blog or to promote my book that's coming out. Now, here's the interesting thing. You are more marketable in this space if you have an event coming up. One of my clients does the Live Richer campaign every January. She started out with 20,000 participants, and now she's up to 500,000. And so it's something that is grown. And she is able to capitalize on some of that brand ambassadorship work around that event. So if you have a book that's coming out, that's being released, preferably a royalty-based book rather than a self-published book, because if you're being published by Random House or another royalty-based publisher, they're going to do a whole campaign for you. And as you're negotiating with a potential brand ambassadorship work, they'll always ask you, what do you have coming up? Where are you speaking? What events do you have coming up? And if you say you have a book release coming out and you name your publisher, and they don't have to be the biggest on the block, but you name your publisher and you have this book coming out, they can build a whole campaign around your book release, which actually makes you newsworthy. Okay, to get on shows, to be able to do events, to do some of the campaigns that they're talking about, there has to be a reason for you to be on the morning news. And it can be, Ellie Kay has a new book coming out called Lean Body, Fat Wallet, and she's going to talk to us today about financial fitness. And so they have disclosed ahead of time that that is a sponsored event, and they've named the sponsor. Sometimes it's put right underneath the screen, this segment sponsored by TaxAct, or whoever the sponsor is for that. But it's built around that. So that would make you think, oh great, I can promote my work. No, this is not about you. If you want to be a good brand ambassador, you work for them. You deliver what they want you to deliver, and you exceed their expectations. Now, does that mean that you give them work for free? No. PR firms, and please forgive me if you work for a PR firm that secures brand ambassadors regularly for your clients. But PR firms have to perform for their client, and they're constantly saying, oh, well, can you just go ahead and do, maybe a couple of Facebook mentions and an Instagram? They'll try to get the talent, the brand ambassador, to throw that in for free. Well, those are $800 a piece. And so that's where I come in, and that's where you understanding how marketable that is, where I'm like the bad cop, and my client's like the good cop, the happy Bethany, that's getting up and making announcements and those kinds of things, and just the talent. But I'm the bad one that comes in and says, no, she can't do that unless you want to pay $800 a social mention, or whatever it is that they're trying to get you to throw in. So they're notorious for that, and that's why it's important to know exactly what the campaign details. So it's not about you, and it's all about the messaging. Now, I've already told you guys that this is a news clip that we're going to play. It's actually a little bit longer for a satellite media tour, but it's kind of a fun clip. That's why I chose it. I want you to guess who the client is for this. And hopefully it will work.
This is Fox 5 News, live in Las Vegas.
QL, knowledge is power, and it's also getting really pricey.
That's right. The cost of college can be hard to cover. That's why we've called in a financial expert to help you plan ahead. She's going to join us live from New York right after the break. Hey everybody, welcome back to Fox 5 News Live in Las Vegas at 8:43 right now. College is hard enough for students. Where do I go? How am I going to make friends? How am I going to survive all these tests? What am I going to eat? How am I going to eat? Is it going to be enough? And for parents, how are we going to pay for it all? Well, Ellie Kay, America's family financial expert, joins us live from New York to tell you the secrets to graduating college debt-free. Okay, you know what? You are the star of the morning, if you can tell me that. Welcome. How you doing?
Well, thanks. It's really great to be with you today.
All right, so tell us, I mean, a lot of college parents out there right now, they're wondering how they're going to pay for it. The economy is down. A lot of folks have lost their jobs. Please tell us, Ellie, how we can do this.
Well, we have 7 children, and they're all
Whoa.
set to graduate debt-free from college. 4 have already graduated from college, 2 are in college, and 1's headed towards school. They are all going to graduate debt-free. And one of the places that we start is we tell our children that our love for them is unconditional, but our money is conditional. So they are going to have to earn part of that college experience.
I
They
heard
really
that.
are. Yeah, and this translates, Monica, into the whole idea that they're going to have to earn college scholarships or do work-study programs or work during the summer. We had one daughter that took off between her sophomore and junior year to work. That entire year she went back to Columbia University and graduated well. So it really can be done, but you have to be the parent and you have to let them take responsibility for part of their college education.
You know, Ellie, I'm glad you said that you have to be the parent, because so many times we do these stories about parents wanting to be their kids' friends. I don't care about being my son's friend. I want to be his mother. Let's just be honest here. And I think that's a philosophy that has gone to the wayside and has a lot of young people depending on their parents in spite of their ability to work.
Well, that's true, Monica. And you know, we can speak our children's language. When we're trying to be the parent, we can actually talk to them in their own language. And one of the ways to do this is to empower them to be able to take responsibility for some of the things that they can control. For example, the third largest expenditure right now behind tuition and room and board is textbooks. And the average student can cut that in half. It can be done if they're very strategic. And I'll tell you how to do that. First of all, go to the on-campus bookstore. That's where you're going to find a lot of different options from new, used, digital, and rental. Now, rental is one of my favorite because Follett's Rent-A-Text program enables you to save 50% or more, plus you can use those hard-earned financial aid dollars to pay for it if you're using an on-campus bookstore, and you're going to get free shipping. So why pay for something that you don't have to? Have it shipped to the bookstore, let your student go pick it up. That's an easy way to save 50% right there on the third largest expenditure.
You know, Ellie, that's a really good thing you bring up, because I think when Jason and I were in college, digital and rental books were not available. So these kids have a lot of new options that are huge money savers.
Well, they do, and you know, rental, for example, is one of the best kept secrets. More people need to understand. I just bought rental, saved 52%. So there are some really good options out there. And another good option is the campus card. If you're going to send your child money, put it on the campus card, load it onto there. Then you know they're only spending it on the campus. It's a way for you to be able to still measure, have a measurement of control, and yet it gives them the freedom to fail. So you set them up for success, you give them the room to fail, and you give them a safety net in all of that.
You know what? I like you. Our love is unconditional, but our money is not. How can
tell them that?
Yeah. How can folks get a hold of all of your information, your book, all of your advice? Because this is good stuff.
Well, a lot of the things we've talked about today can be found at rentatext.com or my website, elliekay.com, where I've blogged about everything that we've discussed.
Okay. All right. You got 7 kids and you're doing it, so I believe you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's really great being with you today, Monica.
And you too. Take care. That's some good information.
I got to tell you, having that interview and the interview earlier about decorating the dorms, I'm getting I'm not even in college, and I'm getting really excited.
It's a fun time in a person's life. It really is.
Okay, so will you get this back where it needs to go, Bethany? Okay. All right, so you guys, it's a long segment. Multiply that by 35. And that's what I did that day. And I'm telling you, by the time you're around number 10 or 12 on those interviews, you start to freak a little bit and you think, did I just answer that question? Because you kind of go into automatic pilot and you start to wonder, you know, where you're at with it. So that's why it takes a lot of focus. So, who was the client on that? Okay, so we got the client, right? It's Rent-A-Text. Here's the hard part. They had actually 3 messaging points that they wanted me to deliver. And these are a little bit more difficult to get. Okay, so what was one of them, Kate? Okay, that was one of them, yes, that they wanted to do that. The other one? That was just an also ran. That wasn't a primary messaging, but that was part of the script. That wasn't one of the primary messagings. Mike? Okay, the website, yes. I mean, they want to drive you to the website. And there was one other area. No, that's not it. That's just kind of an added benefit. It's really unusual, but they were wanting me to drive it home. That's it, your campus card. Okay, so I hate to do this, but you got the most unique answer, so these other folks are going to be a little upset. Sorry, Mike Kelly. So we're going to do that. Okay. So there we gave it away. All right, now let's understand the process. So remember I told you about how I started getting these little pings that come back and forth? Have any of you started to get some of those inquiries? And it doesn't have to be for something as like mundane as, you know, food products or something, but have any of you started to get a few hits and inquiries that have been coming in? Anybody yet? Okay, have you? Like, what's been the inquiry? The client. Yeah. Okay, see, that's perfect. So what's going to happen is initially, you're probably going to be approached by the PR firm. And they have NDAs, non-disclosures in place. Sometimes to actually find out who the client is, you might have to sign an NDA to be able to understand that. But what they'll do is they'll reach out and they'll say, we have a financial brand that they're representing, and we want to know if you are currently under contract for another financial brand. And so that's a legit type of inquiry. Or they might ask you for specific dates because they have an SMT date, they have an event date, and they want to know if you're available for that. Now, that's part of the initial process. And a lot of those, if you start to get those, then that's great because you're being viable for this whole different niche area of brand ambassadorship. And by the way, if you will revamp your blogs, your bios, your websites, and you will start to add language like brand ambassador, and you'll add language like spokesperson. So you add that to your website, then when these 23-year-old college interns or recent college graduates that are working for the BR firm are going out trying to find multiple available spokespersons and their rates. So that's part of the process, is this initial inquiry that comes in. Now, on some occasions, you're going to have brands that you're working with, and they really like you. You have all kinds of goodwill coined for them, and you could actually pitch them with the idea of, hey, I'm a brand ambassador. If we want to solidify our relationship a little bit more, and you can pitch them some specific ideas that you have for ways that you can partner with them as a brand ambassador. So that's the very first step. And then the next step is that they are going to ask you in this process what your rates are. So they may have an initial conversation, okay? So they do this inquiry, then they're going to call you on the phone, and the team's going to be on. So the boss is going to be on, and they're going to talk to you back and forth. And if you don't know what an SMT is, you're in trouble. If you don't know what your rates are for a Twitter chat, then you're in trouble. If you don't know what you charge for a speaking gig, or desk side interviews, or any of these other things, then you're sending the message to them that you're not really viable, that you're not really what they're wanting because you're not working in the space. And so a little bit of it is that. Here's another really important point. In the 50-plus clients that I have had over the years, never once have I compromised my integrity. Never once have I sold any, and I'm a financial brand, right? I'm also a military brand. And I'll tell you about one of those gigs in a minute here. But I have never once promoted anything that got people further in debt. And there's a lot of financial brands that are trying to sell prepaid legal services or something, and in the settlement, you end up giving them 80% of what it settles for. We turned down that gig. So there's others that are basically, you're selling the usage of a credit card because they're trying to get you to use the credit card, put more debt on it, and who knows whether my tribe can pay that off or not. So you have to be true to yourself. And the other thing that I do for myself, but I do for some of the brands I represent is, I would rather have them turn down a Wells Fargo gig because they may not want to be part of the Fix-It plan. And sorry, once again, if you're from Wells Fargo, that it may not benefit my client's brand to be part of the Fix-It plan for that brand because they will hire people to try to fix it as brand ambassadors. Now, there was a Visa Providian many years ago that was a big problem, and they wanted me to be part of the Fix-It plan, but the only thing I talked about were credit scores and how to improve your credit score. And it just said that it was brought to you by Visa Providian, but it was purely educational. And so that's fine for me because they really weren't selling anything. So that's one of the first steps as you start to get those inquiries. Then they will ask you how much you charge for all of these other things. And I didn't want this to be streamed on Facebook Live or anything because I'm going to share some numbers with you and give you a little bit of proprietary information. And I didn't really want to put it on a slide because it varies so much from person to person. But they will ask you for pricing, and what I always do is, for myself and for others, I will say, here's my a la carte menu, which I put together for them. But if you have a more substantial package and you make a more substantial commitment for a bigger campaign, then we can discount these a la carte rates. Now, here's something else to keep in mind. You don't want to compete against yourself. So if you start to get things coming in and you're working for Visa Well, then when MasterCard comes to you a couple months later with a bigger offer, like 3 or 4 times more, you've already locked yourself down with Visa for a much smaller amount. So there ends up being a little strategy involved. Even if there isn't an official non-compete clause in your contract, they won't want to hire you if you're locked down and all over your website you've got Visa. That is why, if you go to elliekay.com, I have not really monetized my website, because I don't want a client that's looking to hire me to come on and see that I have another brand on there and I'm getting, pennies on the dollar for what I could be getting if I got hired for a campaign. So that's the next thing that we're looking at in terms of being able to understand the process. So now we've pretty much discussed everything that I wanted to talk about, but I did promise you to talk about some rates. So let me just rattle off some rates right now. These are my current rates. So $5,000 per day or for part of a general appearance day. So a lot of the news that I've done in the past, I live northern LA County, is same day news. So Fox wants me to be on, ABC News wants me to be on, CBS, NBC, and they're wanting, sometimes those hits go to not the best spokesperson, it goes to the most available person that's there. I mean, and I've hated it, like the Today Show called, and I'm getting on a plane in San Francisco on my connection, and they're wanting me to be in LA that afternoon, and I had to turn it down because I wasn't there. So these things can kind of come up that way. So I would charge $5,000. They'd send a car for me. I have first-class accommodations and all of that. You can usually request that on this level of brand ambassadorship. And so I would charge $5,000 for 3 minutes on the air to be able to do that. So that's what that looks like. $2,500 per travel day. So when I'm flying from LA out to New York and back, it's $5,000, $2,500 for each day that I'm traveling there and back. $15,000 per SMT. So you can get like 20 for an SMT. And then you also have a training day, which adds more onto that too, about another $5,000. So that's where you could, I could get $25,000. Now I've been working in the space for a long time. And I'm going to give you the rates of some of my clients, and I'm not going to tell you who they are, but some different kinds of rates that are available. $7,500 per video. So if you're doing an educational series for a brand and you're providing financial education, that would be $7,500 per video. An RMT is only $10,000, and there's no travel involved in that. I do it from home in my pajamas. And then $5,000 per RN, a radio news release taping session. And then if they want to use my name and likeness on the website, that's $4,000 for the initial use, and then traveling with that for the next month. And then we got about $800 per social. And then when it comes to blogs, about $5,000 per blog. And then you take about half of that, and that's what some of my clients are doing right now, but they're building up to it. And so let me open it up for a couple of questions, and then I'm going to be around. So let's just take maybe a couple questions, Bethany, and then I'll be around and I can answer any other questions.
All right, we're only going to have time for about one question, and then okay. Ellie will be available to answer. So I see a hand up in the back, blue shirt, one question. Yeah, you, yes, yeah, red tie. There you go. Yeah. Do you want a microphone? Okay, I'm coming over here. Okay.
Assuming I'm confident or overconfident enough that I have the skill set to do this, does it require kind of the establishment of a brand identity or Q rating to get into the space?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to be an expert in your field. So whether you're establishing your brand, you have to be an established brand. And there are a lot of other really great breakout sessions that we've had during this influencers campaign on ways to establish your brand and to build your brand. So yeah, you have to be an established brand to be able to even start to work in this space. But here's what's cool, is that now that you've heard all of this, you can maybe, as these inquiries start to come, or as you're working with other partners, you can look to expand that. So that's it.